Hello, this is the Dove Lady. I'm going to read you just a little bit out of a book that I have a PDF file of called The Cosmic Pulse of Life. It's by Trevor James Constable. Now, these aren't my pictures that you see here. These are like my pictures of orbs, but what he saw in his lifetime and recorded were things he filmed with his camera that were in the sky. He called sky critters. He worked with them and with William Reich and his Cloudbuster. I'll read about that in a little bit to you. And he was able to work with these sky critters and bring the rain. When he flew an airplane with the Cloudbuster on it, then the sky critters could help him harvest the energies it takes to bring rain to an area. But this was only if it was in a tropical area and not really high desert. It could be done in a real dry atmosphere, but it would take much more resources and a longer time to produce the rain. And no one ever granted him any research money to conduct that kind of further investigation of how to do it in areas that were more in need of rain. But I want to show you that the little things in his pictures, these sky creatures, are a whole lot like what I see in the orbs, that I take pictures of, including those two little eyes. This one camera puts puts these two eyes. I'll point to them right here. Well, you see them, those two little black dots right there. It puts it in every orb that shows up in the picture. It puts the two eyes in the same part of the orb, which is to the right and a little lower than center. And let me show you a few more of the pictures. And these are called bioplasma, something like that. Here's another one, couple pictures that he got of things that live in the sky. Now this is at Giant Rock. It turns out that Trevor James Constable knew George Van Tassel, and it would go to this giant rock, which I have visited that. It's in California, Landers, California. I camped out right under it one night. I spent a night in my van, parked by this big giant rock. But it was real popular in its day. They had conventions there for UFO conventions, that sort of thing. And Van Tassel had a restaurant and a home right here, and you could actually go under the rock, which I will read about in just a second. This is another picture that he took, and then also this one. And this is a plasmoid-like being. I don't know if that's one of his pictures. Here's another one that looks a whole lot like my pictures of orbs. And here's another one that little thing right there, pointing to that little thing right there. That kind of thing is in my camera. It's one of my artifacts. And it gives me the crazy notion that I might have a living kind of creature of light inside my camera. But call me crazy if you want to. I kind of think that, because I do have some evidences to that. But makes sense to me. But anyway, I want to read to you this. This is something, just a little bit of what, let me focus this differently, of what Trevor said about radar. He says, radar is telling, that's not very clear. Wait a minute. Well, maybe you can't read this, but radar is telling people of science now, as it has told them times without number since the war, pressed down and running over, that there are at work in the atmosphere of the earth and beyond invisible objects that are nevertheless physical. Giving all this names such as propagation anomalies does nothing but divert attention from the matter. Calling them angels provides only uneasy chuckles, unworthy of men of truth, invisible yet physical. So he worked with radar and with a lot of people that understood it better than I do, for sure. But this is what he has to say about giant rock. Giant rock derives its name from a colossal boulder that rests near the end of a remote dry lake airstrip in the high desert of Southern California. Around the giant rock, Van Tassel has created through the years a small living complex, including a restaurant and his own home. He has also created the physical facilities for his annual spacecraft convention. Now, this is no more. I've been to a giant rock and all that is not there anymore. Just the rock is still there. There was a prophecy about that rock, that it would split. And I might put the video into this description bar where I talk about how it did get hit by some kind of light that split it, but only out on the corner, not right down the middle. And that had just something to do with the prediction of how the transition into the new Earth would be, whether it would be very dramatic or like a cesarean birth if it had been struck and just split wide open. But as it was just a portion of it off the edge of the rock that was split off. In the days when I first visited Van Tassel's place, he used to conduct communications with UFO intelligences from a chamber hewn out of the ground beneath the giant rock. There was no technical apparatus for this communication. Stumbling down the rough stairs in semi-darkness, one was seized by the horrendous possibility that the giant boulder might roll and crush the chamber complete with occupants. There were usually about 60 or 70 persons present at these seance-type gatherings, varying from college professors to ordinary workers, people, and always including a sprinkling of reputable and successful businessmen. Van Tassel's preparation for contact consisted mainly of focusing the minds of all present into an energetic unity. Songs were sung in unison, prayers and chants followed, then came silence, while Van Tassel waited for contact. Van Tassel, in effect, functioned as a psychic radio operator, focusing the power of his transmitter, the biological energies of his gathering, to attract the attention of someone with whom he wished to communicate. His calls were answered. Out of the darkness from Van Tassel's direction would come booming the most dynamic and powerful voices I have ever heard. For years as a youngster, I studied voice and speech, and as a young radio actor, put these studies to practical use. I was always around accomplished radio actors and announcers, and on this account was extremely voice and speech conscious. I understand fully the art and technique of changing one's voice so as to act out an entire radio play, doing 2 or 3 or sometimes more separate voices. The voices at Van Tassel's were like no others I have ever heard. George Van Tassel is an ordinary man and not highly educated. He speaks well but does not have an unusual vocabulary. He makes occasional grammatical errors like most people. The intelligence who spoke through Van Tassel, utilizing his vocal apparatus as though it were a physical amplifier or transducer for their own thought, made no grammatical errors. The intelligence flowed in strong, forceful language without a split second of hesitancy. The effect was like having Orson Welles present, orating at the height of his powers. Several of these intelligences would speak one after the other. There was in each case a distinct change in the speech pattern, pace, voice timbre, accent, and subject matter. Don't do that, doll. Hush. Sorry about this, my dog. He sees something on the porch. Maybe it's a rat. No radio actor could have done it. Van Tassel's vocal mechanism provided a sound carrier, as it were, upon which all these other voices were impressed. There was no doubt that they were speaking through Van Tassel, but not only because of these objective facts, but also because of something that I experienced and therefore learned by actually being there. I found that I could hear, in a way new to me, the thoughts of these beings before they were transduced by Van Tassel's vocal apparatus. The effect was akin to monitoring a tape recording, the broadcast of which is briefly delayed. I knew what Van Tassel was going to say before he got it out of audible sound. Prior to this time, I had no psychic abilities or experience with any kind of psychic phenomena. All of it had been, to me, a tightly closed book. Now it was opening. Blundering in where angels might be terrorized, I asked Van Tassel how he was able to develop his receptive ability. He gave me certain routines to follow. Not aware at this time of any element other than idealism in connection with UFOs, I followed Van Tassel's indication with diligence and persistence. Once at a later time, I became for a brief minute the loudspeaker used by these strange intelligences. There was no doubt that communication was being carried on by these means, no matter what official science might think of it. On one occasion in my presence, and subsequent to their promise to do so, luminous UFOs manifested in profusion above the nearby desert until dispersed by Marine aircraft from the 29 Palms base that were scrambled on intercept. The trilogical, professor on the USAF payroll may smile, but he does not know. The new knowledge is the property of those who participate, and I was unequivocally convinced that the entities piloting this disc were quite capable of communicating with human beings without any need for radio apparatus. My empirical work had begun with a little research involving my own psychophysical person. With consuming interest, I read the technical matter that these intelligences had communicated to Van Tassel. My electronics background was insufficient to penetrate this material, but everything about it seemed to throb with life, even though it was beyond my comprehension. Reading the communications was an adventure in itself. Worlds within worlds, densities within densities, energies, polarities, ethers, material with no seeming connection to earthly concepts, but all of it discussed with an overlay of good humor and love. From this time on, I began to think that just being an ordinary man might be an advantage in investigating this subject. I had only a little junk to jettison before tackling this new knowledge. The communications referred often to the primary energy in connection with spacecraft propulsion, and I knew that this was, at this juncture, no readily intelligible connection to Earth science. There was something missing, something crucial, from the ever-multiplying trivia of modern knowledge at human disposal. Intuitively, I got on the trail of that missing something right then. These intelligences were doing things differently to us, and our men of science weren't trying to find out the answers. They were trying to kill UFOs and pouring their energies instead into the rackety and uncertain fireworks at Cape Canaveral. As in They Live in the Sky, that's a book he wrote, I detailed my first psychic experiences and will not therefore repeat them here. Suffice it to say that by persisting with the techniques learned at Giant Rock, I set the stage for an eruption of the unseen worlds into a consciousness, mine, not prepared for such an impact. Becoming sensitive suddenly to spectra of vibration, with which one is totally unfamiliar, can be an unhinging experience. In recent years, the so-called psychedelic revolution has exposed untold thousands of persons to the consequences of chemical tampering with consciousness. All such forcing open of doors is destructive of orderly inner development, no matter what the academic qualifications of it advocates. There was in my case no vision of the unseen worlds or astral phantasmagoria, but I did develop extreme sensitivity to telepathic impulses. I found that I could barely control the situation. In daily business life in the aviation industry, I would hear a sentence psychically before a client ever spoke the words physically. When the telephone rang, I knew who was calling before I picked up the instrument. A constant struggle soon ensued for control of my physical vehicle, myself against unseen interlopers. I was fighting continually against various forms of automatism. Anyone who doubts the reality of occult things would have no doubt whatever concerning them were they to endure an experience of this order. I emerged from it all with a solid respect for the reality of the occult that I have never subsequently lost. My difficulties were extreme, and I felt that I was slowly losing my battle to retain my mastery of myself. I bitterly regretted ever having meddled in UFO communications. The intelligence into whose realm I had broken poured confusing rubbish into me. There did not seem to be anyone to whom I could talk about my difficulties without already seeming to be around the bend. All was not lost, however, for a great man was at hand. Dr. Franklin Thomas was a publisher of many small UFO books as the owner of a New Age publishing company in Los Angeles. Many of these books dealt with the things I had stumbled upon. He used to give lectures in his Glendale Boulevard bookshop on Friday evenings, and I resolved to attend. Franklin Thomas was a diminutive, slight, sharp-featured man, wrinkled of face and generally shabby. He seemed indifferent concerning his physical person. His lectures were delivered in a soft, low-pitched voice, but with a lucidity that I found enthralling. He could cover the esoteric aspects of widely divergent subjects in such a way that he constantly brought seemingly unconnected things into a higher synthesis. I knew that he could assist with my problem. He was heavily burdened in his struggling business, and his health was failing. He knew he was dying, and at a period when he needed all his reserves of strength, he spent as little time as possible after his lectures talking to those who pressed him with questions. He listened carefully to me. There was an understanding nod and a knowing glint came into his eye. I asked him to help me. He agreed. He was the most accomplished occultist I have ever known, an adept and master teacher, functioning as one of us in the workaday world, but otherwise something much more. At a time of loose talk about the occult and occultism, to have known and been taught by Franklin Thomas was an occult experience in itself. This shabby little man had conscious control of the hidden forces of nature, and he wielded his powers in setting me free. I became in a short time complete master of my own house again, and the ability I had forced myself to function telepathically was brought under control. This was the first step toward suppressing the faculty entirely. The essence of regaining control was to confine the receptions to a given time of day and never to depart from this regimen. Then it became every other day, every third day, and finally the spurious door to the unseen was closed and sealed. Every student of esoteric matters who wishes to make genuine progress in the development of his inner life will find the avoidance of psychism and psychic phenomena as an involved party absolutely essential. During this period when I had these daily contacts and before all such activity was halted, some information was passed to me concerning the UFO mystery in many of its aspects. I had learned through Franklin Thomas how to sort out the otherworld telepaths, those intelligences which would seek to communicate without controlling had what seemed to be the valid information. Through Franklin Thomas and his gentle guidance, I began to discern that the mystery required a sound working knowledge of occult science for its overall comprehension. My knowledge of these things was so limited that it was absurd to think that anything of great value could be passed through me. I was an inadequate instrument for any such purpose. Recognition of this fact by me accelerated my phased withdrawal from psychic activity. During these limited contacts, information was nevertheless passed from the other side that went against many of the commonly accepted conceptions of UFOs. Later publication of this material was to make me a sort of pariah even in the way out UFO field. The truth is unwelcome in this world, and it hurts because of its innate power to disturb. The entities I contacted conveyed to me, in essence, the following basic information. UFOs are spaceships, but their vibratory makeup is not fixed in the physical material density. They are mutants. UFOs have their main existence in a density that is invisible to human beings of normal vision. The intelligence behind the spaceships are various orders of etheric beings, that is, beings differently constituted to man and normally invisible to him, yet capable of materializing at will when necessary or required. 4. A war is in progress for control of the mind of man, a veritable battle of the earth that will determine the future course of evolution. 5. There are negative forces from beneath man seeking to drag him down, and positive forces assisting him to fulfill his destiny in freedom. 6. There are normally invisible living beings in space that are not spaceships. 7. Space is filled with primary energy currents of which existing Earth science knows nothing. 8. Infrared film exposed between dawn and sunrise in high, dry locales will frequently objectify invisible objects of various kinds living in and passing through the atmosphere. The information permitted the formulation of a skeleton UFO theory and also opened a pathway to obtain objective proof of the presence of UFOs. The latter would come to hand only if the communicating intelligences had told me the truth. I had work to do of both a theoretical and empirical nature. At this point, Franklin Thomas had a serious talk with me. I pass it on now as his fundamental wisdom. You have reached a point where you have a sort of assignment, a task to discharge. I cannot tell you where it will lead, to discovery or to disappointment, but I can tell you with certainty that success, if it is to come to you, demands that you cut off all psychic activity and abandon it entirely. Everything for you henceforth must be in the full light of consciousness, with no communication of any kind with any unseen forces, no matter what their purported wisdom. Contact must be with your own high self, your Atma, and with nothing interior to that. Or maybe that should have been inferior. I just typed this up the other day. This advice was followed. All psychic activity was terminated. My experiences had convinced me that the disc occupants communicated by means of thought transference, telepathy in its many variants, and that communications with earthlings would be unlikely by any other method. Communications seem to require either that the human being surrender in some way the function of his organism to beings that he could not see, or that new devices for manipulating the primary energy of these entities spoke would have to be designed. These new cosmic electronics would use biological energy. Experience had already shown that such devices were quite different and enormously advanced over anything possessed by Earthmen. Later on, my adventures would bring me to a remarkable personality who had made revolutionary strides into cosmic electronics, but for the moment I did not know where to begin. I did know in a fashion that permitted of no contradiction that if ever UFOs were to be understood in comprehensive theoretical approaches made to the subject, I would have to resign myself to years of study and research. This endeavor would, by its very nature, lie outside the boundaries of official science. Despite the resources and facilities that they commanded, the official scientists were getting nowhere in penetrating the UFO mystery, and my brushing personal involvement with the technology behind UFOs taught me why they had failed and would continue to fail. Humans were looking in the wrong places for their answers, and they were looking in the wrong way. Man, to their mode of cognition, was $2.98 worth of chemicals organized in a complex way. Complexity of organization. Okay. Is it just a recording? I said my battery is low. May have to end this pretty quick. Man, to their mode of cognition, was $2.98 worth of chemicals organized in a complex way. Complexity of organization was held to be the only difference between man and the chair on which he sat. I was already interested in the energy that propelled me across the room. When I asked learned physicians about this energy and what it was, I found that they became angry. Already I was beginning to think that there might be a functional identity between my personal power source, the biological energy that drove me across the room, and energy that drove the disk across our skies. Learned, able men with the highest academic qualifications were avoiding confrontation with both. Franklin Thomas continued to tutor me in his quiet way. Everything he taught me concerning occult knowledge was given to me in such a way that I could dovetail it with something I could personally observe in the outer world. When I reported having noticed something different about a common feature of our environment, thereby illustrating that I was dynamically understood and applied his teachings, he would give me something more. He steered me to the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, the Australian philosopher, scientist, and founder of the Anthroposophical Society. The scope and sweep of this universal genius was staggering. As I plunged into anthroposophy, I realized that I was in contact with a body of new knowledge and a methodology for penetrating the unseen worlds that was wholly healthy and demanded the best that was in me for its pursuit and application. My whole life began to change. And I'm at 27. This is going to cut off. I may read more of this if there's any interest. And it's going to cut off real soon, so I will just let it go out as you see some of the pictures of orbs go by. And this will slowly stop because it's already at 28 minutes. But if anyone's interested in this book, The Cosmic Pulse of Life, I have it as a PDF file. I can send it